His hand was cold against Elena's body. A reminder, Julian Vance doesn't make threats with weapons. He makes them with silence, with the calculated pressure of his body pinning hers against the walls of his luxurious penthouse, with the windows overlooking a Chicago skyline. She's grown to hate almost as much as she's grown to want him. 6 months. 6 months of this dance, this game, this slow-burning torture that neither of them will name. "You went to the gallery," he says, his voice low and dangerous. "After I explicitly told you not to." His breath is warm against her neck, and she can feel every rigid line of him pressed against her. The tailored suit does nothing to disguise the tension coiled in his muscles, the barely restrained fury that makes her pulse race for reasons that have nothing to do with fear. "You don't own me, Julian." "Don't I?" His hand flattens against the wall beside her head, caging her in. "Check your ring finger, wife. Check the penthouse you live in. Check the last name on your credit cards." She turns her head just enough to meet his eyes. Those impossible hazel eyes that have haunted her for 160 days. Yes, she's counted. Every single morning she's woken up in his home, sleeping in a bed 3 doors down from his, pretending she doesn't hear him pace his room at 3 a.m. like a caged animal. "Then stop pretending you don't want to collect on your investment." Something flickers across his face. Heat, hunger, something raw that he immediately buries beneath that impenetrable control. The gun shifts as he moves, tucking it back into the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Security protocol. Julian Vance has enemies, though he's never told her their names. He hasn't told her anything, really, except all the ways he doesn't want her. "Make a choice," she whispers, holding his gaze. "Kill me or take me. I'm tired of this game." For one breathless moment, she thinks he might. His pupils dilate, his jaw clenches, and his hand moves from the wall to her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there, his thumb against her racing pulse. Then he steps back, and the cold rushes in to fill the space where his heat had been. "Go to bed, Elena. It's only 10 o'clock. I don't care if it's noon. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." She should leave. She should take the escape he's offering and retreat to her room, like she has every other night of this sham marriage. But she's so tired of retreating. "The only thing you'll regret," she says softly, "is wasting whatever time we have left." She walks away before he can respond, feeling his eyes on her with every step, knowing he's watching the sway of her hips in the silk robe she chose specifically because it catches the light, because it suggests everything he's been denying himself. Behind her, she hears glass shatter. His fist, a window? She doesn't know. She doesn't turn around. This is how they survive each other. In moments, in almosts, in the terrible space between wanting and having. But it wasn't always like this. My beautiful Romance Haven family. Before we begin, this story contains passionate scenes and intense emotional tension between our married couple. The slow-burn nature of their relationship may feel frustrating at times, but that's what makes their journey more rewarding. If you enjoy emotionally complex, steamy romance, let's dive in. I created this story with zero intentionality to offend anyone, so this is me apologizing if it offends you in any way. Welcome to Romance Haven Stories. Do like, comment, and share this story. New viewers, comment below where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all. Now relax. It's about to be a wild ride. 6 months earlier, Elena's father's voice on the phone had that particular hollowness that meant he'd done something catastrophic. "Elena, sweetheart, I need you to come home." Home was Los Angeles, a hilltop estate in Bel Air that she'd grown up in and grown away from. She'd built her own life in Boston, a small marketing consultancy, a brownstone apartment in Beacon Hill. Friends who didn't care that her last name used to mean something before her father systematically destroyed his own reputation with increasingly reckless development deals. What happened? Not on the phone. How soon can you get here? 18 hours later, she was sitting in his study while he explained how he'd lost $60 million. Not his $60 million. He'd mortgaged everything years ago. This was investor money. Specifically, Vance global investor money funneled through subsidiary holding companies into LA commercial real estate developments that had catastrophically failed when the market shifted. Marcus Corves, she said slowly, using his full name because he'd stopped feeling like Dad somewhere around the third bankruptcy. You gambled $60 million of someone else's money on office parks in this economy? He had the decency to look ashamed. The projections were solid. The projections were fantasy. She stood, pacing the same Persian rug she'd played on as a child. Who's the investor? What's the timeline for repayment? That's complicated. How complicated? The door to the study opened, and her father's lawyer entered. A weasel-faced man named Briggs, who'd been helping Marcus dig deeper holes for a decade. Behind him came someone else. Elena had seen Julian Vance before, of course. Wall Street Journal covers, Bloomberg articles, that infamous profile in GQ that had half the women in America fantasizing about being summoned to his office. Photos didn't do him justice. They couldn't capture the sheer presence of him, the way he seemed to bend space around himself just by existing. 35 years old, built like he actually used the private gym in his skyscraper, dark hair cut sharp enough to draw blood. A face that was almost too handsome, except for the hardness in his eyes. The kind of hardness that came from building a financial empire before most people finished their MBA. He wore a navy suit that screamed luxury just looking at it. And he looked at her like she was a balance sheet he was evaluating. Miss Corves. His voice was exactly what she'd expected. Deep, controlled, with the faintest trace of a mid-Atlantic accent from his years at Harvard. I'm Julian Vance. I know who you are. Then you know why I'm here. Perhaps, she responded. $60 million. He said it like someone else might say $60. An inconvenience, not a catastrophe. Plus interest, plus penalties for the contractual breaches involved in the misappropriation of funds. Her father made a sound like he was being strangled. Julian, we discussed options. Vance's eyes never left Elena's. I'm presenting the one your daughter needs to hear. Something cold slithered down her spine. What option? He smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made her understand how he destroyed every competitor who'd ever challenged him. Marry me, and the debt disappears. Your father keeps his house, his reputation, and a $12 million settlement to restart his business. Everyone wins. The room tilted. I'm sorry, what? It's not a complicated proposition, Miss Corves. I need a wife for business purposes. You need your father's debt to disappear. We help each other. Business purposes. She looked at her father, whose face had gone carefully blank. You're trading me like a business asset because you gambled wrong. Elena, how long have you known about this? Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. We've been negotiating for 3 weeks. 3 weeks? He'd spent 3 weeks bartering his daughter to a billionaire stranger while she'd been in Boston, completely oblivious. And when exactly were you planning to mention it? I'm mentioning it now. His voice hardened with the particular defensiveness he always deployed when he knew he was wrong. You have 18 hours to pack your things and be on a plane to Chicago. The wedding is in 4 days. The wedding? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You actually think I'm going to agree to this? Julian Vance spoke quietly, but somehow his voice cut through everything else. You'll agree because the alternative is federal prosecution for your father. Wire fraud, securities fraud, investor fraud. He'll spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, and you'll spend the same 20 years watching your mother deteriorate without the medical care she needs for her condition. Her blood went cold. You wouldn't. I would. I have the documentation prepared. The FBI is very interested in your father's creative accounting practices. He checked his watch, something sleek and Swiss that probably cost more than a car. 18 hours, Miss Corves. I suggest you use them wisely. He left without waiting for a response, because men like Julian Vance didn't wait for anything. Elena turned to her father, who suddenly looked every one of his 65 years. Mom's condition. What condition? The Parkinson's has progressed. She needs full-time care, the kind that costs money you don't have because you gambled it away. The betrayal was so complete, she almost couldn't feel it. Almost. How long have I got? The plane leaves at noon tomorrow. 18 hours to pack up a life. 18 hours to say goodbye to everything she'd built. 18 hours before she became Mrs. Julian Vance. She didn't sleep that night. She packed mechanically, clothes, books, the few things that mattered, and tried not to think about what she was walking into. Tried not to remember the cold calculation in Julian Vance's eyes when he'd looked at her like a problem to be solved. By the time she boarded the private jet to Chicago, she'd cried herself empty. By the time they landed, she'd rebuilt the armor. If Julian Vance wanted a wife, he was going to get one. Just not the kind he was expecting. 4 days later, Elena stood in Chicago City Hall wearing a dress she hadn't chosen. Pearl satin, designer label, perfectly tailored to a body they'd somehow gotten exact measurements for. Her hair had been styled by professionals who'd arrived at the penthouse at dawn. The makeup artist had done something that made her look luminous and untouchable. She looked like Julian Vance's wife. She felt like an expensive doll. The rotunda was filled with 300 people she'd never met. Business associates, finance industry royalty, investors who needed to see that Julian Vance was settling down, becoming stable, becoming the kind of man you'd trust with your billions. This was the business purpose. Julian Vance, genius finance mogul, was too young, too ruthless, too unpredictable. A wife meant stability. A wife meant he was thinking long-term. A wife meant the board of directors would stop questioning his volatility. She was a PR strategy in a pearl satin dress. Julian stood at the front in custom Tom Ford, looking like every fantasy she'd tried not to have during the 4 days since Los Angeles. Devastating was the only word for it. The kind of beautiful that made smart women do stupid things. She walked down the aisle alone. Her father hadn't been invited. This wasn't that kind of wedding. When she reached him, Julian's expression was unreadable. He took her hand, the first time he touched her, and his skin was warm, his grip firm and somehow possessive, despite the complete lack of emotion in his eyes. The ceremony was perfunctory, words spoken by a judge who'd probably been paid extra for discretion. She heard herself say, "I do," like someone else was speaking. When Julian kissed her, it was cold and controlled, a brief press of lips that meant nothing and promised less. The 300 guests applauded like they'd witnessed something beautiful instead of a transaction. The reception at Vance Tower was exactly what she'd expected. Champagne that cost more per glass than she used to spend on groceries, catering by a James Beard award-winning chef, a string quartet playing in the corner, while tech billionaires and venture capitalists congratulated Julian on his beautiful bride. She smiled until her face hurt. She made small talk with strangers. She played the part. And then, 3 hours in, Julian's hand closed around her elbow. "We're leaving." He didn't ask. He informed. She let him guide her to the private elevator that went directly to the penthouse because she was tired of performing. The doors closed, sealing them in silence. "You did well tonight," he said, eyes fixed on the rising floor numbers. "I'm so glad I met your expectations. Sarcasm isn't necessary, Elena, neither is this marriage." But here we are. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, 10,000 square feet of minimalist luxury overlooking Lake Michigan, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable, art on the walls that was probably worth millions. It felt like a museum. Cold, untouchable. Julian shrugged out of his jacket, loosened his tie. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost human. "We should establish some ground rules," he said. "Of course, heaven forbid we have an actual conversation." He ignored that. "You'll live here. You'll attend events with me as needed. Fundraisers, galas, business dinners. In public, you'll play the role of my wife. Devoted, appropriate, poised." He poured himself scotch from a crystal decanter. "Didn't offer her any. Privately, you'll stay out of my way. I work long hours. I value my space. You'll have your own bedroom, your own bathroom. The penthouse is large enough that we shouldn't have to interact unless necessary." "How romantic." "This isn't a romance, Elena. It's a business arrangement. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." She slipped off the designer heels that had been torturing her for 6 hours. "And what about the obvious question?" she asked. "Which is?" "Sex," she answered without hesitation. For the first time, she saw him react, a muscle tightening in his jaw, his fingers flexing around the scotch glass. "I won't touch you," he said carefully, "and you won't warm my bed. We'll maintain separate lives in that regard." "So I'm a wife in name only?" "Yes, and if I want company—" His eyes went flat and dangerous. "Be discreet. Don't embarrass me. Don't let it become public knowledge. The same rules apply to you, I assume. I'm not interested in outside complications." He wasn't interested in her either. He'd made that abundantly clear. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt something like disappointment, which was absurd. She didn't want Julian Vance. She didn't want this marriage. She didn't want any of this. But standing there in his cold, beautiful penthouse, wearing a wedding dress she hadn't chosen, married to a man who'd bought her to solve a PR problem, she made a decision. If Julian Vance wanted a convenient, obedient wife who'd stay out of his way and make no demands, he'd married the wrong woman. She smiled sweetly. "Of course, husband. Whatever you say." He looked at her like he didn't quite believe her. Smart man. "Your room is the third door on the left. Your things have already been unpacked. If you need anything, there's a house phone in every room." How thoughtful. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Julian." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her again. That same heat she'd felt in City Hall when he'd taken her hand. He didn't want her. He'd said so explicitly. But he was lying. She knew he was lying, and she had nothing but time to prove it. So here's my question for you. If you were Elena, would you have accepted Julian's cold rules, or would you have walked away, debt or no debt? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you fight, or would you flee? Elena started small. She moved a sculpture from the entryway to the living room, a $15,000 piece of modern art that Julian had positioned with mathematical precision. When he came home that evening, his eyes went straight to the empty pedestal, then tracked to its new location near the windows. His jaw tightened. "Did you move that?" "It gets better light here, don't you think?" "I think it was fine where it was." "I disagree." She walked away before he could respond, and she didn't move it back. The next day, she rearranged the throw pillows on his pristine velvet sofa. Pillows that had been positioned at exact angles, untouched since the interior designer had placed them. She angled them casually, the way people actually lived. Julian said nothing, but she saw his fingers flex when he noticed, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. By the end of the first week, she'd introduced color to his monochrome existence. A teal throw blanket over the back of a chair, fresh flowers, bright yellow tulips in a vase on the kitchen island, books on the coffee table instead of hidden away in perfect alphabetical order on shelves. The penthouse started to look like someone actually lived there instead of like a photograph in Architectural Digest. And Julian Vance, master of control, said nothing. But his body betrayed him. The clenched fists, the rigid posture, the way he'd stand in the doorway of a room she'd altered, staring like he was physically restraining himself from putting everything back. Week 2, she escalated. She discovered his conference call schedule. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m., he took video calls from his home office. The door would close, and for 90 minutes the penthouse would be silent except for the low murmur of his voice discussing mergers, stock prices, strategic projections. The first Thursday, Elena put on music. Not loud, just present. A jazz playlist with a sultry saxophone that drifted through the penthouse like smoke. Within 5 minutes, his office door opened. "Turn it off." "I'm sorry." She looked up from her book, The Picture of Innocence. "Is it too loud?" "I'm on a call. The penthouse is large enough that we shouldn't have to interact unless necessary. Your words, husband." His eyes went dark. For a moment, she thought he might actually lose that legendary control, his hands fisted at his sides, knuckles going white. "Please," he said, and the words sounded like it cost him something. "Turn it off," she smiled. "Since you asked nicely." She turned it off that time. The following Tuesday, she waited until his call started, then practiced yoga in the living room directly outside his office. Downward dog in fitted athletic wear. The office door cracked just enough that if he glanced out, he'd see her. She heard him stumble over his words, heard the strain in his voice as he tried to focus on whatever merger he was discussing. This was her power, she realized. This man who controlled billion-dollar portfolios, who made grown executives tremble with a single look, who'd built an empire on ruthless calculation. She could unravel him with a yoga pose. It was intoxicating. But she didn't discover just how much power she had until the incident in the hallway. Elena had claimed the guest bathroom since Julian made it abundantly clear his bedroom, and by extension his master bath, was off limits. The guest room was 3 doors down, and the hallway between them had become a sort of no man's land that they navigated carefully, always aware of each other's movements. That particular evening she'd showered late. The water had been hot enough to turn her olive skin warm, to make her muscles relax, to steam up the entire bathroom. She wrapped herself in a towel, one of Julian's expensive Turkish cotton towels that felt like sin against her skin, and opened the door. Julian was in the hallway. He froze. She froze. And then, because she was tired of retreating, tired of playing it safe, tired of pretending she didn't see the hunger in his eyes every time he thought she wasn't looking, the towel slipped. Not completely, just enough. Just to where it barely clung to her curves, where water tracked down her shoulders, between her breasts, along the line of her collarbone. Julian's eyes followed every drop. His throat worked on a swallow. His hands fisted so tightly she could see his knuckles go white even from 10 feet away. "Cover yourself." His voice was strained, rough, nothing like his usual controlled tone. Elena stepped closer instead of away. "It's my home too, or are you giving me a dress code now?" "Elena, you said separate lives." "Private lives. This is my private life, Julian." She watched him war with himself, watched desire and control battle across his face, watched his eyes drag down her body like a physical touch before he wrenched them away. Then he turned and walked to his study. The door closed. The lock clicked. Elena just discovered Julian's weakness. Now I want to know, do you think she should push harder? Or is she playing with fire? Is she being empowered or reckless? Tell me what you think. Elena smiled and continued to her room. But as she dried off, as she slipped into a satin nightgown, she heard it. Through the walls, through the door he'd locked, through all his carefully constructed defenses, she heard him. Heavy breathing, a low groan, and then, so quiet she almost missed it, her name. Not a summons, not an order, a surrender. She established a morning routine designed to destroy him. 6:30 a.m. every day, she unrolled a yoga mat in the center of the living room, right where the morning light flooded through those floor-to-ceiling windows, right where Julian would see her on his way to the kitchen for his first cup of coffee. She wore fitted athletic wear, leggings that hugged every curve, a sports bra that left her midriff bare. Her skin seemed to glow in the early light as she moved through poses with deliberate slowness. Downward dog, cobra, warrior, each position held just long enough to test his resolve. The first morning, Julian had stopped in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug halfway to his lips, and stared. She'd been in pigeon pose, her body stretched in a way that made the leggings pull tight across her hips. She'd glanced over, catching his eyes on her. "Good morning." He'd said nothing, just turned away and gripped his coffee mug so hard she heard the ceramic crack. By the third morning, he'd started making his coffee without looking in her direction, his movements sharp and controlled. But she could feel his awareness of her like heat against her skin. Could sense the effort it took for him not to look. On day 5, she added a soundtrack. Slow, sensual music with a deep bass that seemed to pulse through the penthouse. She moved to the rhythm, let her body roll and stretch and bend in ways that were less about exercise and more about provocation. The coffee mug didn't just crack that morning. It shattered. Julian stood at the sink, coffee dripping down his hand, porcelain in pieces, and his eyes finally met hers. "Careful," she said softly. "You're bleeding." He looked down at his hand like he hadn't noticed the cut across his palm. Then he grabbed a kitchen towel, wrapped it tight, and left for work without a word. Elena smiled and continued her routine. The yoga was just the beginning. Julian's control is crumbling day by day. Here's what I need to know from you. Are you Team Elena? Push him until he breaks? Or Team Julian? He's right to hold back? Whose side are you on in this battle? She started wearing silk robes around the penthouse. Not the modest kind meant for coverage, the expensive, barely there kind that whispered against skin and caught light like water. They tied loosely at her waist, and she made sure they came undone at strategic moments. Reaching for a book on a high shelf, the robe would slip open, revealing the curve of her breast, the line of her hip. Bending to pick up something she dropped, the silk would slide, exposing the length of her thigh. She never acknowledged it, never made it seem intentional, just went about her day in various states of undress, while Julian slowly unraveled. She found him in the kitchen one afternoon, staring into the refrigerator like he'd forgotten what he was looking for. His tie was loosened, his jaw tight. When she walked past him to get water, the robe slipping off one shoulder, he made a sound low in his throat that was almost a growl. "Is there a problem?" she asked innocently. "No." The word was bitten off. "No problem." But his eyes said otherwise. His eyes said he was one silk robe away from breaking every rule he'd set. Julian had a video conference at 2:00. She'd learned his schedule by heart. Important investors from London discussing the expansion of Vance Global into European markets. He'd be in his glass-walled study for at least 90 minutes, visible but supposedly undistracted. Elena waited until the call started, until she could see him through the glass in full professional mode. Tailored shirt, focused expression, hands gesturing as he discussed quarterly projections. Then she settled onto the living room sofa, directly in his sight line, and began applying lotion. She started with her feet, slow, methodical movements, her hands smoothing the lotion along her ankles, her calves. She'd changed into a short silk slip dress, the kind that rode up when she shifted position. Through the glass, she saw Julian's eyes flicker toward her, saw him force them back to the screen. She continued up her legs, her shins, her knees, the sensitive skin of her inner thighs, where she took her time, let her fingers linger. Julian stumbled over his words. She heard it even from the living room, the slight hesitation, the loss of his usual commanding tone. She moved to her arms, long strokes from wrist to shoulder, then her collarbone, her throat, the upper curve of her breasts, where the dress dipped low. His hands had stopped gesturing. He was stock still, and even though he was trying to focus on the screen, his eyes kept betraying him, sliding to where she reclined on his sofa, touching herself in ways that were perfectly innocent and absolutely devastating. When the call finally ended, Julian emerged from his study, looking like he'd survived a war. "Dry skin," Elena explained, holding up the lotion bottle. "The air in Chicago is so different from LA." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and went to his bedroom. The door closed with careful, controlled precision. But she'd seen his face. She'd seen the barely leashed hunger there. He worked late most nights. She'd learned that too. He'd be in his study until 11 haxes or midnight, visible through the glass walls, bathed in the blue light of multiple monitors as he built his empire. Elena would put on music, not loud, just present, songs with slow, sensual rhythms that seemed made for moving your body, and she'd dance. Not for him, ostensibly, just for herself. Alone in the living room, with the city lights spread below, she'd let the music move through her. She'd close her eyes, let her hips sway, let her hands slide up her body into her hair, let herself get lost in the rhythm. But she was always aware of him, always conscious of the man watching from his glass cage, his work forgotten, his hands braced on his desk like he was holding himself in place. Sometimes she'd spin, let the movement lift her dress. Sometimes she'd arch her back, arms overhead, body on full display. Sometimes she'd move so slowly, it was almost torture for both of them. One night, she opened her eyes mid-dance and found him standing at the glass wall of his study. One hand pressed flat against it, his expression stripped of all the careful control he usually maintained. He looked hungry, desperate, like a man dying of thirst watching water he couldn't have. Their eyes met across the space. Elena smiled and continued dancing. Julian stayed at the glass for another minute, then disappeared deeper into his study where she couldn't see him. But she'd seen enough. The night she discovered him in her doorway, she'd been asleep, or almost asleep. That twilight space between waking and dreaming where awareness gets fuzzy. Some instinct pulled her back to consciousness. Some sense that she wasn't alone. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing even, but her other senses sharpened. Someone was there. In her doorway. Watching. Julian. She knew it was him from the particular quality of silence, from the faint scent of his sandalwood cologne, from the way the air seemed to shift with his presence. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in the darkness watching her sleep. Elena's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain still, forced her breathing to stay slow and deep. Whatever this was, whatever had driven him to her room at 3:20 a.m., she needed to let it play out. Minutes passed. 3, 5, maybe more. She felt his gaze like a physical touch moving over her body beneath the silk sheets. Imagined what he was seeing. Her hair spread across the pillow, one arm above her head, the sheet draped low enough to reveal the curve of her shoulder, the line of her collarbone. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, she heard him exhale. A shaky, unsteady breath that spoke of a control barely maintained. He left as silently as he'd come. The door didn't close. He'd never opened it all the way, just stood in the frame like he was afraid to cross that threshold. Elena waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Waited until she heard his bedroom door close. Then she opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, her pulse racing. A few minutes later, she heard the shower start. At 3 a.m., in Julian's private bathroom. The water ran for a long time. 20 minutes, 30. And through the walls, these expensive walls that were supposed to provide privacy, she heard sounds that made heat pool low in her belly. Heavy breathing, a groan, low and rough, the sound of a palm slapping against tile. And then her name again, louder this time, like it was being torn from his throat. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to imagine it. Julian under the spray, water streaming over that perfect body she'd only seen in tailored suits, his hand on himself, his control finally, privately breaking. The thought was intoxicating. The walls between them had never felt thinner. She could hear every sound, could almost feel his frustration, his need, his desperate attempt to maintain the boundaries he'd set. When the shower finally stopped, silence fell over the penthouse again. But Elena didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the darkness, knowing he was doing the same 3 doors down. Both of them aware of each other, both of them wanting, both of them trapped by rules that were becoming more meaningless with every passing day. The tension had become unbearable. Elena had chosen her dress carefully. Black, elegant, sophisticated. Exactly the kind of thing Julian would approve of, except for the back, which didn't exist. The fabric draped to the base of her spine, leaving her entire back exposed. She'd had her hair styled up, revealing her neck, her shoulders, the line of her spine. Diamond earrings Julian had sent to her room without comment, heels that made her legs look endless. When she emerged from her room, Julian was waiting by the elevator, checking his watch. He wore a tuxedo like he'd been born in one. Perfect fit, perfect style. Devastating. He looked up when he heard her heels on the marble floor and froze. His eyes traveled over her slowly, taking in every detail. The dress, the exposed skin, the way the fabric clung to her curves. When his gaze finally returned to her face, something dangerous flickered there. "You're not leaving dressed like that." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Change." "No." She moved toward the elevator. Julian stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "I said, change." And I said, "No." "Dear husband." She tried to step around him. He moved with her, staying in her way until her back hit the door, and he was there, arms braced on either side of her head, caging her in. They were inches apart, close enough that she could feel his heat, smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "Elena, you're going to walk into that gala wearing that," he said, his voice low and rough. "And every man there is going to look at you. They're going to see all that skin and they're going to want what's mine." "Yours?" Her breath came faster. "You made it very clear. I'm not yours. Separate lives, remember?" Elena lifted her hand, let it trail down his chest. She felt his heart pounding beneath the crisp white shirt, felt the way his breathing hitched at her touch. "Afraid you'll break your precious vow?" she whispered. His eyes went dark. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "Then tell me," she said. "If I touch you." His voice was strained, his control visibly fraying. "If I touch you, I won't stop. I'll make sure everyone at that gala knows exactly who you belong to. There won't be separate lives anymore. There won't be boundaries. There won't be any going back. I'll bend you over every surface in this penthouse. I'll mark you so everyone knows you're mine. I'll ruin you." Her breath hitched. "Maybe that's what I want." For a moment, one perfect, suspended moment, she thought he'd do it, thought he'd close that last inch between them and finally give them both what they'd been wanting for weeks. His hands were shaking where they pressed against the door. His eyes were locked on her mouth. His whole body was taut with the effort of holding back. Then he pushed away from the door so abruptly she almost fell. "Go." His voice was rough. "Do whatever you want. Wear whatever you want. Get yourself killed for all I care." He turned and walked away, leaving her there against the door, her heart racing, her body aching with unfulfilled need. Elena took a shaky breath and pressed the elevator call button. She went back to her room, peeled off the black dress, and lay in the darkness, listening to Julian pace his room like a caged animal. She didn't go to the gala, but Julian didn't need to know that. She'd gone to a coffee shop instead, called her friend Sophie in Boston, and spent 2 hours talking about nothing important while sitting in a corner booth watching the city move past the windows. When Sophie mentioned her cousin Thomas, some diplomatic attaché she'd met at a wedding, Elena had laughed loudly enough to draw looks from other patrons. She was still on the phone when she stepped into the elevator to the penthouse, still laughing as the doors opened into darkness. The penthouse was unlit except for the city glow through the windows. Elena ended the call, slipped her phone into her clutch, and reached for the light switch. "Did you have fun?" She froze. Julian's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, the living room maybe, or near the windows, low and controlled, but with an edge that made her pulse quicken. "Julian, I didn't realize you were still awake. I asked you a question." She found the light switch. Soft illumination flooded the space, revealing him standing near the bar, still in his tuxedo, but disheveled now. Tie gone, shirt partially unbuttoned, hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked dangerous, undone. "The evening was pleasant," she said carefully. "The ambassador's nephew is quite charming." Something flickered across Julian's face, something dark and possessive that made her breath catch. He reached for the glass of scotch on the bar beside him, gripped it too hard. The glass shattered. Crystal exploded in his hand, scotch and blood dripping onto the white marble. Julian looked down at it like he hadn't noticed, like the pain was irrelevant compared to whatever was eating him alive. "Jesus, Julian!" Elena dropped her clutch and rushed to him. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Let me see." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, cradling it against his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Did he touch you?" The question came out rough, dangerous. "What?" "The ambassador's nephew. Did he touch you?" Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. This wasn't the controlled, calculated man who'd laid out boundaries on their wedding night. This was someone else entirely, someone barely holding himself together. "Are you jealous?" "I don't get jealous, Elena." His jaw clenched, blood dripped onto his shirt, spreading in dark spots against the white fabric. "Give me your hand," Elena said, softer now. "Please." After a long moment, he extended it. She led him to the kitchen, ran cold water over the cuts, watched the blood swirl down the drain. The injuries weren't deep, just cuts from the shattered glass, but there were several of them. She found the first aid kit under the sink, pulled out antiseptic and bandages. Julian stood silent while she cleaned each cut, his eyes on her face, his breathing carefully controlled. "Did he touch you?" he asked again, quieter this time. Elena looked up from wrapping gauze around his palm. Would it matter if he did? "Answer me." "Why?" "We have an arrangement, remember? Separate lives. I can see whoever I want as long as I'm discreet." His other hand shot out, gripping the counter beside her hip, caging her in. "Answer me." They were inches apart. She could feel the heat radiating off him, could see the barely controlled fury in his eyes, could smell scotch and blood and his cologne. "No," she said softly. "He didn't touch me." Something like relief crossed his face, followed immediately by something darker. Hunger. Need. "But you want to touch me so badly it's driving you insane, don't you?" His hand tightened on the counter. "Elena." He made a sound low in his throat, half groan, half growl. Then his control shattered. He kissed her like he was dying and she was oxygen. Desperate, demanding, his good hand cupping her face while his bandaged one braced against the counter. His mouth was hot and hungry, tasting like scotch and desperation. Elena kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. 6 months of tension, of wanting, of this terrible dance, all of it poured into the kiss. His hands moved to her waist, lifted her onto the counter. She wrapped her legs around him, and he groaned against her mouth, his hips pressing into hers in a way that made her gasp. Her hands went to his belt, fumbling with the buckle. Julian caught her wrists, pulled back. "No." "What?" She was breathing hard, her lips swollen from his kisses. "Not like this." He released her wrists, stepped back. I'm not in control." Elena stared at him for a moment. Then she slid off the counter and slapped him. The sound cracked through the penthouse. Julian's head snapped to the side, and when he looked back at her, his lip was split, blood beading at the corner of his mouth. "Coward," she breathed. His eyes went dark. He caught her wrist before she could pull away, his grip firm but not painful. "Careful, wife. I'm trying to be honorable." "I don't want honorable." She stepped closer, getting in his space, her free hand pressing against his chest where his heart hammered. "I want you to keep your promise about ruining me." His thumb brushed over the pulse point on her wrist, too fast, betraying her, while his other hand came up to his split lip. He looked at the blood on his fingers, then back at her. "You have no idea what you're asking for." They stood there both breathing hard, the air between them charged with everything unsaid, everything still denied. Julian released her wrist slowly. "Go to bed, Elena. Make me." His jaw clenched. She could see him fighting himself, see the war between what he wanted and whatever was holding him back. "If I touch you again tonight," he said quietly, "I won't stop. And you're angry right now. You're trying to prove a point. That's not how this happens." "You don't get to decide that. Someone has to. Because if I take you against this counter the way I'm imagining, you'll hate me in the morning. I might hate you anyway. I'll risk that." He took a step back, then another, putting distance between them. "But I won't risk hurting you because I couldn't control myself." Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. "You really think you're protecting me?" "I know I am." "From what? From wanting my own husband? From trying to turn this nightmare arrangement into something real?" His expression cracked just for a moment, letting her see the raw need beneath. "From me? I'm trying to protect you from me." "I don't need protection, Julian. I need you to stop being a coward and admit what we both know, which is that you want me." He was silent for a long moment. "Wanting you and having you are different things. And once I cross that line, everything changes for both of us. Maybe I want everything to change. Maybe you think you do, but you don't know." He stopped, shook his head. "Go to bed, Elena, please." She stared at him. This impossible man who kissed her like she was salvation and then pushed her away like she was poison. Blood still stained his shirt. His lip was split from her slap. His bandaged hand trembled slightly at his side. He looked wrecked. And still, he wouldn't give them what they both needed. "One day," she said softly, "you're going to run out of excuses. I know. And when you do, I might not be waiting anymore." Something like fear crossed his face. "I know that, too." Elena picked up her clutch and walked to her room, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. Behind her, she heard him exhale shakily, heard him whisper her name like a prayer. But he didn't follow. If Julian Vance wanted to play the martyr, wanted to deny them both what they so clearly needed, then she would make his noble suffering absolutely unbearable. She started bringing men to the penthouse. Liam Sterling was first, a venture capitalist she'd met at one of Julian's tedious networking events. Handsome in that generic, wealthy way, utterly boring, but he served a purpose. She invited him for drinks, made sure to time his arrival for when Julian would be home. They never made it past the foyer. Elena had no intention of actually entertaining these men, but Julian didn't know that. She'd laugh too loud at Liam's mediocre jokes, her hand on his arm. She'd stand too close, let her hair fall forward when she looked up at him, and she'd make sure Julian could see it all from his glass-walled office. The first time Julian had emerged from his study within 10 minutes, his expression carefully blank. "Elena, I didn't realize we were having guests." Liam was just leaving. She'd smiled sweetly. "Weren't you, Liam?" Poor Liam had looked confused, but read the room quickly enough. "Right. Early meeting tomorrow. I'll call you." Julian had waited until the elevator doors closed. "What was that? A friend?" "You said I could have my own life," she said. "In private. Discreet. Not bring them to my house." He fired back. "This is my house too, remember?" He'd stared at her for a long moment, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Then he'd turned and went back to his office without another word. Elena had smiled. She did it again 3 days later. An artist from a gallery opening, then a tech entrepreneur Julian's age who talked endlessly about cryptocurrency. Then Liam again. Because repetition made the point stronger. Each time Julian would emerge from wherever he was working. Each time his control would crack a little more. His hands would fist, his jaw would tighten, his eyes would go dark with barely suppressed fury. But he never said anything. Never forbade her. Never admitted what it was doing to him to see other men in his space, near his wife. I escalated. She stopped wearing underwear. It started almost accidentally. A sundress on a warm day. The freedom of it making her feel powerful. But then she'd noticed Julian's reaction when she'd reached up to get a book from a high shelf. The way his eyes had tracked the movement of fabric. The way he'd gone absolutely still. The way his throat had worked on a swallow. He knew. After that, it became intentional. Silk pants that clung to every curve, making the absence of panty lines obvious. Thin cotton dresses that shifted with every movement. Linen skirts that showed everything in the right light. Julian noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes would darken every time she bent to pick something up. Every time she stretched, reaching for something just out of reach. Every time she crossed her legs while sitting across from him at breakfast, the fabric pulling tight. She watched his control crumble day by day, watched him grip counters until his knuckles went white, watched him excuse himself abruptly, disappearing into his room where she'd hear the shower run at odd hours. He was breaking. She just needed to push a little harder. The kitchen scene happened on a Thursday evening. Elena had spent the afternoon exploring the penthouse, really exploring it, opening doors she hadn't bothered with before. Julian's walk-in closet was a revelation. Rows of perfectly tailored suits, shelves of expensive watches, and dozens of white dress shirts, each one probably worth more than her monthly rent used to be in Boston. She'd taken one, slipped it on over her bare skin, buttoned it just enough to be decent, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. She'd found ingredients for pasta. Nothing fancy, just something simple she could manage without burning down the penthouse. She was humming to herself, stirring sauce, when she felt him behind her. "What are you doing?" Elena didn't turn. "Making dinner." "You can't cook." Julian's voice was closer than she'd expected, rough around the edges. "Just because I don't cook doesn't mean I can't cook. Besides, the internet has tutorials for everything." Silence. She felt his eyes on her, felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch moving down her body. "You're not wearing—" He cut himself off. She turned then, spatula in hand. The picture of innocence. "Not wearing what?" His eyes dropped to where the shirt ended, mid-thigh, lingered there. She watched him realize exactly what she wasn't wearing, watched the knowledge hit him like a blow. "This has to stop," he said, his voice strained. "What has to stop? This? This seduction game you're playing?" "I'm not playing anything, Julian. I'm making dinner. If you have a problem with my wardrobe choices." He moved so fast she didn't have time to react. One moment she was at the stove, the next he'd spun her around and pressed her against the counter, his body a solid wall of heat behind her. "Every day," he said, his breath hot against her ear. "You walk around like you don't know what you do to me." Her heart hammered. "Then do something about it." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I start, I'll never stop." His voice was raw. "I'll become the monster everyone thinks I am." Elena turned in his arms, forcing him to either step back or stay close. He stayed close. "What if I want to unleash the monster?" His hand rose to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there. His thumb found her pulse racing, betraying her. His other hand gripped her hip hard enough that she knew there'd be marks tomorrow. She could feel him hard against her stomach, could feel the tremor in his hands, could see the war in his eyes between control and surrender. "Julian—" His phone rang. For a moment she thought he'd ignore it, thought he'd finally choose her over everything else. But then she saw the name on the screen, London Investors, and watched him make the decision. He answered in clipped tones, his eyes never leaving hers. "Vance." His hand stayed on her throat, his other hand remained on her hip, possessive and claiming. He held her there while he discussed investor concerns, stock fluctuations, emergency board meetings required within the hour. His thumb stroked her pulse while he talked billions. When he finally ended the call, the moment had shifted. The urgency was still there, the need. But now there was something else, too. A promise. "I have to go," he said quietly. He stared at her for another moment, then released her and stepped back. She watched him straighten his clothes, run a hand through his hair, rebuild the controlled facade he showed the world. But his eyes were still wild when he looked at her one last time before leaving. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Elena was alone in the kitchen, still wearing his shirt, still able to feel the ghost of his hands on her body. Next morning, Julian set down his coffee with deliberate precision, his eyes on the tablet in front of him, where he'd been reading the morning briefings. "You're staying home tonight." Elena looked up from her own coffee. "Excuse me?" "The gallery opening. You're not going." "I RSVP'd 2 weeks ago." "I don't care." He finally looked at her, and his expression was harder than usual. "There have been threats. My Uncle Silas is making moves against the company, against me. It's not safe." "Then don't go." "I have to." "You don't." Elena set down her cup carefully. "You're not seriously trying to order me to stay home like a child. I'm telling you, as someone who understands the danger, that attending that event is a risk I'm not willing to take." "Good thing it's not your risk to take." His jaw clenched. "Elena." "I'm going, Julian. You don't get to lock me away because you're having corporate drama." She left the table before he could respond, but she felt his eyes on her back, felt the anger radiating off him in waves. He didn't speak to her for the rest of the day. That evening, Elena chose her dress with care. Red silk that clung to every curve, with a back that plunged nearly to her tailbone and a slit that ran to her hip. The kind of dress that demanded attention. The kind of dress she knew would make Julian lose his mind. She was applying lipstick when she heard his footsteps in the hallway outside her room. "Don't." His voice came through the closed door. She opened it. Julian stood there, still in his work clothes, his tie loosened, his expression thunderous. "Don't what?" His eyes traveled down her body, and she watched his hands fist at his sides. "Don't go, please." The please almost made her reconsider. Almost. "I'll be fine, Julian." "You won't be. Silas has people everywhere. If he sees an opportunity, then your security team can earn their salary." She grabbed her clutch and moved past him toward the elevator. His hand caught her wrist. "Elena, I'm asking you." She looked at where he held her, then up at his face. For the first time, she saw something beyond anger there, something that looked almost like fear. "And I'm telling you, I can take care of myself." She pulled free and stepped into the elevator. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was Julian's expression. Fury and frustration, and something desperate. The gallery opening was exactly what she'd expected. Champagne, overpriced art, people in expensive clothes pretending to appreciate abstract paintings that looked like accidents. Liam Sterling found her within 20 minutes. "Elena, you look incredible." "Liam, I didn't know you were interested in contemporary art." "I'm interested in beautiful things." His smile was practiced, smooth. "Can I get you a drink?" She let him stand too close, let him touch her lower back when guiding her through the crowd. She even laughed at his jokes, though she couldn't have repeated a single one later. And all the while, she felt eyes on her. Julian's security team. She'd spotted them within minutes of arriving. 2 men in dark suits positioned at different points in the gallery, their attention never wavering from her. He was having her followed. She should have been angry, should have felt violated by the surveillance. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He cared enough to protect her even when she'd defied him. She stayed at the gallery for 2 hours, long enough to make her point, long enough that when she finally left, heading back to the penthouse alone, her feet ached from the heels, and she was tired of pretending to enjoy herself. The security team followed her car. She watched them in the rearview mirror, staying a careful distance behind. The penthouse was dark when she arrived. Elena stepped out of the elevator, reaching for the light switch, when his voice came from the shadows. "You never listen." She froze, her heart jumping into her throat. Julian emerged from the darkness near the windows. He hadn't turned on any lights, was just a silhouette against the city glow, but she could feel the intensity radiating off him. "I told you not to go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not my father, Julian. I am your husband." He moved closer, and now she could see his face, hard and furious, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. "I told you it wasn't safe, but nothing happened. Nothing happened because I had dozens of security teams on you." He kept advancing until her back hit the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Nothing happened because I spent the entire evening monitoring every person who came within 10 feet of you. Nothing happened because I made deals I didn't want to make to ensure Silas's people stayed away from that gallery." His hand slammed against the glass beside her head, making her flinch. For the first time since she'd met him, Elena felt genuine fear. Not of violence. Julian would never hurt her. She knew that instinctively. But of the promise in his eyes, of what might happen if the last threads of his control finally snapped. "Do you know what could have happened tonight?" His voice was rough. "Do you have any idea?" "I was fine. You were vulnerable, exposed, and that bastard Sterling had his hands on you. Why do you care so much?" The question hung between them. Julian's breathing was heavy, his hand still braced against the glass, his body caging hers in. She could see the gun holstered under his jacket. Security protocol he'd mentioned before, but she'd never actually seen him carry. "Why, Julian? Why does it matter?" "Because I've had security on you every day since the wedding." The admission came out harsh. "Every time you left this building, every time you went anywhere without me. Do you know what it cost me not to act? Every time you let another man touch you? Every time Liam Sterling put his hands on my wife? Why do you care if other men touch me? Are you really that blind?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Are you really that oblivious? You said you didn't want me. You said I lied." The confession exploded out of him, ragged and raw. "I've wanted you since you walked down that courthouse aisle, looking like every sin I've ever wanted to commit. Every morning when you do yoga in those tight clothes. Every night when I hear you through the walls." Elena's breath caught. "What? You think those walls are soundproof?" "They're not. I hear everything. Every whimper. Every time you touch yourself. Every time you come thinking about me and moaning my name." Heat flooded her face. "You could hear?" "Yes, I heard everything." His other hand came up to brace against the glass on her other side, fully caging her in. "Just like you can hear me. Don't pretend you haven't. Don't pretend you don't know what you do to me." "Then why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why push me away?" "Because I'm trying to protect you from my world, from corporate enemies like Silas who would use you to get to me." "From me?" He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Because if I claim you, really claim you, there's no going back. You become a target. You become mine forever. And I'm selfish enough that once I have you, I'll never let you go." "What if I don't want to be let go?" He stared at her, and something vulnerable broke through the anger. Something that looked like hope and fear tangled together. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Elena reached up and pulled him down to her, pressing her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he was still. Then he responded without hesitation, kissing her like he was drowning and she was air. His hands left the glass to grip her waist, pulling her against him. The kiss was desperate, consuming. Months of denial and need poured into the connection of their mouths. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian pressed his forehead to hers. "Elena." "I'm already a target," she said softly. "The moment I married you, I became one. I'm already yours. You made sure of that when you took me from my father. The only question is whether you're brave enough to be mine." His hands tightened on her waist. "If we do this, you'll be in danger." "I'm already in danger." He pulled back enough to look at her face, searching for something. Doubt, maybe? Hesitation. She gave him none. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I've never been more sure of anything. Julian's thumb brushed across her bottom lip. Once I take you, you're mine completely. I won't share. I won't let you go. I won't be civilized about it. She smiled. I don't want civilized. I want you. Something in his expression shifted, the last wall crumbling, the final defense falling away. Then you've got me, he said. God help us both. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back, just raw need and something that felt dangerously close to love when he lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward his bedroom. Not the guest room. His room. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck and finally let herself believe this might be real. No more running, she whispered against his lips. No more running, he agreed. And for the first time since their wedding day, Julian Vance carried his wife over a threshold and meant it. He carried her through the doorway of his bedroom, a space she'd never been allowed to enter. The room was dark, except for the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. He laid her down on his bed with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hunger in his eyes. For a moment he just looked at her, red silk dress against his dark sheets, her hair spread across his pillow, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. I've waited so long for this, he said, his voice rough. So have I. He came down over her, bracing himself on his forearms, and kissed her slowly, thoroughly, like they had all the time in the world now that they'd finally stopped fighting. His hands found the zipper at her side, drew it down with agonizing slowness. The red silk whispered against her skin as he peeled it away, revealing inch after inch of her olive skin to his gaze. Beautiful, he murmured, his hands trailing fire everywhere they touched. You're so goddamn beautiful. Elena reached for his shirt, fumbling with buttons until he pulled back and stripped it off himself. Then his pants, until there was nothing between them but heat and want, and 6 months of denied need. She let her hands explore the body she'd only imagined. Broad shoulders, defined chest, the hard planes of his stomach. He was beautiful, too, all controlled power and restrained strength. When he finally settled between her thighs, she was already trembling. Tell me what you want, he said, his hand sliding up her inner thigh. I want you. More specific. His fingers teased, never quite touching where she needed. I want to hear you say it. Julian, please. I love hearing you beg. His voice was dark, velvet. Do it again. Please, I need you inside me. He cut off her words with a kiss as he finally gave them both what they'd been craving. Elena gasped against his mouth at the sensation. Fullness, completion, the perfect fit of their bodies. Julian groaned low in his throat, his forehead dropping to hers. God, Elena, you feel... Don't stop, please don't stop. He didn't. He moved with controlled precision at first, each thrust deliberate and devastating. But as her nails raked down his back, as she wrapped her legs around his hips and met him movement for movement, his control began to fracture. Say my name, he demanded, his hand fisting in her hair. Julian. Again. Julian. He claimed her mouth, swallowing her moans as he drove deeper, harder. The tension coiled tighter and tighter until she shattered, crying out against his lips. He followed moments later, his body going rigid as he groaned her name like a prayer. They collapsed together, breathing hard, skin slick with sweat. Julian rolled them to their sides, keeping them connected, his arms wrapping around her like he couldn't bear to let go. That was Elena started. Just the beginning, Siren. He cut her off, kissing her shoulder. Siren? She laughed. That's a very funny but unique nickname. I love it, though. You are my siren, Elena. You lured me in until I crashed. He pulled her in for a kiss. They came together again and again through the night. Sometimes fierce and demanding, sometimes slow and tender, learning each other's bodies, discovering what made the other gasp and moan and beg. Here? He asked, his mouth on her neck. Yes. What about here? His hand between her thighs, fingers working magic. God, yes. Tell me. I want to hear everything. She told him what she wanted, what she needed, what she'd imagined during all those nights alone in the guest room. And he gave her everything, wringing pleasure from her body until she was boneless and trembling. Hours passed in quiet intimacy, in whispered words and soft touches. They dozed, tangled together, then woke to reach for each other again. When dawn finally broke through the windows, painting the room in gold and rose, Elena woke wrapped in Julian's embrace. His arm was draped possessively across her waist, his body curled protectively around hers. She felt his lips brush her shoulder. Mine. She smiled, threading her fingers through his. Yours, and you're mine. Always. He pulled her tighter against him. I'm never letting you go. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. They lay there as the city woke around them. Finally on the same side. Finally whole. Finally home. The warning came 3 weeks after everything changed between them. Silas Vance appeared at the penthouse unannounced, his expression carved from the same cold stone as his nephew's used to be. Julian met him in the foyer while Elena lingered in the hallway, close enough to hear. She's a distraction, Silas said without preamble. This company needs your full focus, not some gold digger you married on impulse. Careful, Uncle. Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. That's my wife you're discussing. That's exactly my point. Since when do you let personal entanglements interfere with business? The board is concerned. Your judgment has become compromised. My judgment is fine. Is it? Because the quarterly report suggests otherwise. Elena had wanted to intervene, to defend herself, but Julian had caught her eye and shaken his head slightly. Trust me, the look said. Silas left with thinly veiled threats about emergency board meetings and votes of no confidence. Julian had pulled her into his arms the moment the elevator doors closed. He's going to make a move. What kind of move? I don't know yet, but it's coming. It came at the Chicago Children's Hospital Charity Gala 2 weeks later. Elena was working the room, doing what she'd learned to do well, charming donors, facilitating connections, being the perfect CEO's wife. Julian was across the ballroom in discussion with potential investors when she noticed the shift. Whispers, sideways glances, people suddenly avoiding her. Then she saw Silas speaking with members of Vance Global's board, saw them looking at tablets, saw their expressions harden. Whatever he'd planned, it was happening now. Julian materialized at her side within minutes, his phone already to his ear. Henderson, I need you to file the injunction immediately. Yes, now. I don't care what time it is in London. He guided Elena through a side door into an empty ballroom, still dark and quiet, while the gala continued in the main space. What's happening? She asked. Silas tried to leak fabricated documents suggesting you've been embezzling charity funds. Julian's jaw was tight. He thought it would make me divorce you or face criminal investigation. Julian. It's handled. My lawyers are already filing defamation suits and restraining orders. Silas just destroyed any credibility he had with the board. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension in his body. You're choosing me over him, over your family. Yes, you are the most important person in my life, so I'll always put you first. Besides, you're my family now. He pulled back to look at her face. Does this concern you that I chose you over my uncle? No. Her answer was immediate. It should, but it doesn't. Why not? Because I would make the same choice for you. Her hand cupped his face. Every time. Without hesitation, he kissed her softly, and it was different from the desperate, hungry kisses they'd shared before. This was full of emotion and commitment and promises that had nothing to do with arranged marriages or business deals. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm in the dim light filtering through the doorway. Let's go home, he said quietly. The gala can continue without us. I'm done performing for people who don't matter. He threaded his fingers through hers. I just want to take my wife home. Elena smiled and let him lead her toward the exit, leaving the whispers and Silas's machinations behind. They had each other. Everything else was just noise. The sun was rising over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, when Julian led Elena onto the balcony, wrapped in nothing but one of his dress shirts. He stood behind her, arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the city wake below them. The same city that had felt so cold and foreign 6 months ago now felt like home. I love you, Elena said softly. My monster, my enemy, my husband. Julian's arms tightened around her. I love you too. More than my empire, more than my life. She turned in his arms to face him. Any regrets? He asked. She considered for a moment, a smile playing at her lips. Just one? I should have slapped you harder that first time. We'd have figured this out sooner. His dark laugh rumbled through his chest when she swatted his shoulder. You can slap me any time, Siren. Careful, I might take you up on that. I'm counting on it. He lifted her effortlessly onto the balcony railing, stepping between her thighs. The shirt rode up, and the morning air was cool against her skin. But Julian's body was warm as he pressed closer. So what now? She asked, her hands sliding up his bare chest. Now? His eyes went dark with intent. Now I'm going to claim my wife on this balcony where all of Chicago can see who you belong to. Elena glanced down at the city spread below them. They were high enough that no one could actually see details, but the floor-to-ceiling glass behind them, the open balcony, anyone could see. That's the point. His hands slid up her thighs, pushing the shirt higher. Let them see. Let them know the stubborn woman who never listens, who drives me insane, who nearly gets herself killed daily. Let them know she's mine. You're insane! But her breath hitched as his fingers found bare skin. You're going to ruin me. You made me this way. He kissed her throat, her jaw, the corner of her mouth. And you wanted me to ruin you. You begged me to. Julian, say yes, Siren. She looked into his eyes, those impossible hazel eyes that had been so cold 6 months ago and now burned only for her. Yes. He claimed her there, high above the city he'd built, the morning sun warming their skin as he made her his all over again. She gasped his name into the morning air, her hands fisting in his hair, her body arching into his as pleasure built and crested and shattered. As Julian drove into her, as he whispered her name like a prayer, as they moved together in perfect rhythm, Elena thought about their strange journey. From that courthouse wedding to this moment, forced marriage becoming real love, cold arrangement transforming into burning need. She'd been traded like a business asset and found her soulmate. He'd bought a wife for PR and discovered his heart. Stubborn hearts, both of them. But finally beating in sync. I love you, she whispered, as she came apart in his arms. Always, he promised, following her over the edge. Always. The end. Thanks for experiencing this story with me, my beautiful Romance Haven family. Like, subscribe, and comment your favorite moment below. Share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and I'll see you in the next story. Lots of love.